"Please, lady, you have to help my daddy," the boy wailed, his voice a thin, desperate thread against the storm. Rain fell in sheets over Philadelphia that night, a relentless deluge that scrubbed the city clean of its usual noise and light, and very nearly washed away a man's existence. Julian Vance, Sr., a titan of the East Coast's tech industry, was slumped over the steering wheel of his gleaming black Mercedes, which was angled awkwardly on the shoulder of a poorly lit road just off the main line. A crushing weight pressed on his chest. His vision swam in blurry halos, and each breath was a shallow, painful gasp. He'd pulled over only moments before, waving away the creeping dizziness as simple exhaustion. But this was a far more sinister fatigue. In the back seat, his 5-year-old son, Julian Jr., whom everyone called Jules, pressed his small hands against his father's shoulder. "Daddy, wake up! Please, Daddy!" There was no response, only the steady, hypnotic drumming of rain on the car's roof. The child's voice trembled, tears carving paths down his cheeks as he managed to push the heavy door open. The wind nearly bowled him over, and the cold rain soaked through his small jacket in an instant. He had no idea where he was or where to go. He only knew that a terrible silence had fallen inside the car, and someone, anyone, had to break it. Through the downpour, he saw a figure huddled under a bus stop shelter. A young white woman stood there in a worn-out gray coat, clutching a small, cracked purse to her chest, as if it were a shield. Clara May Thompson, 29 and bone-weary after another 12-hour shift scrubbing floors and cleaning rooms in a downtown hotel, was just trying to get home. She had once worn the crisp, clean uniform of a nurse, a life that felt a century away now, a life she'd lost after she refused to stay silent about a doctor's negligence. She looked up, startled, as the little boy made a beeline for her, his small legs churning through the puddles. "Ma'am! Ma'am!" he gasped, grabbing at the sleeve of her coat. "Please, you have to save my dad. He won't move." Clara May blinked, her tired mind struggling to process the scene. "What? Honey? What happened?" "He fell asleep, I think. In the car. But he won't wake up. I tried shaking him, but he's not breathing right. Please," he begged, his small fingers tightening their grip on her arm. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, shot through Clara May's body. She hadn't heard that particular tone of panic in nearly 3 years, not since the day she was escorted out of Philadelphia General for daring to question a senior physician's fatal mistake. She had promised herself then that she would keep her head down, mind her own business, and never again get involved. But this child, his eyes wide with a terror that sliced deeper than any termination letter or lost career, was pleading with her. "Show me," she said, her voice raspy but firm. Without another word, the boy turned and ran back toward the darkened car, and Clara May followed, her worn sneakers slipping on the slick, rain-washed pavement. They reached the Mercedes, its headlights casting a weak, flickering glow that illuminated the man inside. His lips had a faint blue tinge. "Stay right here, sweetie," she said gently, her hand hovering over the boy's shoulder for a second. "I'm going to help him." She pulled the driver's side door open and carefully eased the man's body back against the seat, tilting his head to check his airway. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was faint, a thready flutter that was barely there. She began compressions, counting out loud to keep her own racing heart in check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, stay with me. Her soaked coat sleeves clung to her arms, the relentless storm blurring the world around her into a maelstrom of wind and water. Suddenly, the squeal of tires cut through the night. A sleek, dark sedan skidded to a stop behind them, and an older woman emerged, shielded by a large black umbrella. Eleanor Vance, regal even in the downpour, her long coat immaculate and diamonds glinting at her ears, took in the scene before her, and her blood ran cold. Her son, limp and unresponsive in the driver's seat, and this stranger, this disheveled woman in a shabby coat, pressing down on his chest. Eleanor's face contorted with a mixture of panic and pure rage. "What in God's name are you doing to my son?" she shrieked, rushing forward. Clara May turned, panting from the exertion. "Ma'am, he's having a heart attack. I'm trying to—" Before she could finish her sentence, Eleanor's umbrella came crashing down on her shoulder. "Liar! Get away from him!" The older woman struck her again, this time with an open palm, a sharp slap across Clara May's face. The sound was swallowed by a crack of thunder. "Grandma, stop it!" Jules cried from the curb, his small voice lost in the storm, but his grandmother didn't hear him. She grabbed Clara May by the collar of her coat, yanking her backward with surprising strength. "Please, you have to let me help him," Clara May gasped, struggling to regain her footing on the wet asphalt. Her knees scraped against the ground, but she pushed forward again, desperate to get back to the man in the car. "If I stop, he'll die." Eleanor shoved her once more, the handle of the umbrella slamming into Clara May's back. "You people never know your place. Get away from him now." Clara May winced in pain, but crawled closer to the car door, her eyes locked on Julian Vance's still chest. Her voice broke with desperation. "He's not breathing. Please, just let me." "She's helping, Grandma!" the boy screamed, his voice finally cutting through his grandmother's fury. "Daddy needs her!" Eleanor froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Clara May to seize the opportunity. She scrambled past the older woman and immediately resumed compressions, her palms pressing into the billionaire's chest with a steady, practiced rhythm, despite the searing pain in her bruised ribs. "Come on," she whispered through clenched teeth, the rain pouring through the open door, drenching them both. "Don't you quit on me now." Her muscles burned, her body screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. Then, a flicker, a gasp. The man's body gave a slight jerk beneath her hands. Clara May leaned in close. "That's it. Breathe. Come on, sir. Breathe for me." Julian Vance, Sr., coughed, a ragged, wet sound as air and water fought their way back into his lungs. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded, but undeniably alive. Eleanor dropped her umbrella, her expression shattering from rage into stunned disbelief. "Julian!" But before anyone could say another word, the night was split apart by flashing red and blue lights. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt nearby. Officers jumped out, their flashlights slicing through the rain like swords. One of the officers grabbed Clara May's arm, his grip firm. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle now." "She saved him!" Jules shouted, running toward them. "She saved my daddy!" Eleanor, still reeling from shock, stammered, She was attacking him, I think." "No," Clara May tried to explain, her words coming in breathless bursts. "He collapsed. I was performing CPR. I'm a former nurse. Check his pulse. He's alive because—" "Ma'am, that's enough," one of the officers interrupted, twisting her wrists behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her skin. The boy cried harder. "Don't take her! She didn't do anything wrong." Clara May met his tear-filled gaze as they guided her toward the patrol car. Her back ached where the umbrella had struck her. Her face burned from the slap, but she forced a small, tired smile. "It's okay, honey," she whispered. "Your daddy's safe now." Behind her, Julian Vance stirred again, his lips moving weakly as paramedics finally arrived on the scene. The last thing Clara May saw before the cruiser door slammed shut was the small boy clutching his father's hand and the elegant older woman standing frozen in the rain, caught somewhere between guilt and utter disbelief. As the car pulled away, its sirens wailing into the wet, dark night, Clara May leaned her head against the cold window. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the profound ache of holding on when every instinct and every person had told her to let go. Sometimes, saving a life meant sacrificing your own peace. And somewhere behind her, a billionaire gasped his first clear breath back into the world because a woman he'd never met, a woman with nothing, had refused to stop. The inside of the patrol car was cold, the vinyl seats sticking to Clara May's soaked jeans. Her hands, cuffed behind her back, tingled with a growing numbness. She couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the adrenaline slowly seeping out of her system. The rain continued its relentless assault on the roof as the vehicle idled by the side of the road. Through the fogged-up window, Clara May could see the flashing lights of an ambulance now surrounding the Mercedes. Paramedics were kneeling beside Julian Vance, Sr., fitting an oxygen mask over his face, checking his vitals. He was alive. That fact should have felt like a victory, but from where she was sitting, it didn't feel like freedom. The officer in the passenger seat turned to glance at her over his shoulder. His face was a mask of professional indifference. He was white, maybe in his late 40s, with world-weary eyes and a badge that seemed to weigh down the front of his uniform. "Name?" he asked, his voice flat. "Clara May Thompson," she said quietly, her teeth chattering slightly. He began writing in a small notebook. "You have any ID on you?" "It's in my purse. I dropped it on the sidewalk when you assaulted the man in the car," he interrupted, his eyes still on his notes. Clara May's body went rigid. "I didn't assault him. I saved his life." "That's not what his mother said." "She hit me," Clara May snapped, the sting of the umbrella and the slap still fresh in her memory. "She pulled me away while I was trying to perform CPR. Look at my shoulder. Look at my face." The officer's pen paused mid-word. He finally looked at her, his gaze lingering for a moment on the faint red mark still visible on her cheek. "Why would she hit you if you were trying to help?" Clara May's throat tightened. There was no simple answer to that question. Because she was dressed in a threadbare coat? Because she wasn't wearing a uniform or driving a fancy car? Because a woman like Eleanor Vance couldn't conceive of a world where a stranger who looked like Clara May would offer help instead of seeking to do harm? She remained silent. The rear door of the cruiser opened, and another officer leaned in. He was younger, Hispanic, with a more alert and less cynical expression. "We just got confirmation from the medics," he said to his partner. "They said she started CPR. The kid confirmed it, too. Said she kept his old man alive until the ambulance got here." The older cop looked back at Clara May. "Is that true?" Clara May nodded slowly. "Yes." The younger officer tilted his head, his eyes assessing her. "The paramedic said her technique was textbook. Said she probably saved the guy's life. She told them she used to be a nurse." "I still am a nurse," Clara May said, lifting her chin. "Just not a licensed one. Not anymore." The younger cop gave a curt nod and stepped back from the open door. "Do you want to press charges for the assault?" the older officer asked, his tone shifting slightly. "No," Clara May said, the word sharp. "But I want it on the record that I was struck. I was physically assaulted, and I did not retaliate. I didn't touch anyone except to save a man's life." A long, heavy silence filled the car. Then, without another word, the older officer opened her door, reached in, and unlocked the handcuffs. You're free to go, Ms. Thompson. Clara May slowly pulled her arms around to her front, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders. She stepped out of the car and back into the rain, feeling a profound sense of weakness wash over her. As she walked back toward the chaotic scene, Jules broke away from a paramedic and ran straight to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs. "You're not going to jail," he cried, his face buried in her wet coat. Clara May crouched down slowly, the ache in her bruised knees making her groan. She hugged him back, her voice soft and soothing. "No, baby, I'm not." Behind them, Eleanor Vance stood near the ambulance, a thick wool coat now draped over her shoulders. Her expression was tight and unreadable. Her eyes met Clara May's, but this time they didn't burn with rage. They just looked tired, confused, and perhaps even ashamed. Clara May made no move to approach her. She had done her part. The rest was not her burden to carry. "Ma'am," a medic called out, waving her over. "We need to get your information for the hospital report." Clara May nodded, gently prying Jules's fingers from her coat. He clung to her like a lifeline. She gave the medic her name, her address, and what was left of her professional credentials. The man looked surprised when she rattled off the precise terminology for chest compressions and vital signs. "You sure you're not still on active duty?" he asked with a half-smile. Clara May let out a long, slow breath. "Not anymore." He jotted down her information and handed her a thick blanket, which she wrapped gratefully around her shoulders. It smelled of antiseptic and warmth. "Do you have someone who can come pick you up?" he asked. Clara May shook her head. "The bus stop is just down the street. I'll be fine." Before she could turn to leave, a low, hoarse voice rasped from the gurney behind the ambulance doors. "Wait!" It was Julian Vance, Sr. He had an oxygen mask over his face, and his eyes were half-lidded, but they were focused directly on her. "You," he whispered. "You saved me." Clara May stepped closer, blinking against a fresh wave of rain and disbelief. "I did what anyone should have done," she said softly. His lips moved again. "Thank you." "Sir, we really need to get you to the hospital," the medic interrupted gently. But Julian held up a weak finger, his eyes never leaving Clara May's. "She didn't hurt me," he said, his voice surprisingly clear. "She helped me." Eleanor flinched behind the medics. Clara May said nothing. Her silence this time was not born of fear, but of restraint. The ambulance doors closed with a solid thud, and the siren began its mournful wail again. As the flashing lights faded into the distance, Clara May pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Her entire body felt as if it had been run through both fire and ice, bruised, sore, soaked to the bone, but still standing. One of the officers approached her again. "If you want to file a formal complaint against the older woman, we can take your statement now." Clara May looked down the street, where the storm was finally thinning to a light drizzle. She remembered the boy's tiny hands pulling on her sleeve, his cracked voice begging, "Please, save my dad." She shook her head. "Not tonight." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Clara May nodded. "Some things are more important than a slap in the face." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "You're a good person, Ms. Thompson." "No," she replied, her voice tired. "I'm just stubborn." She walked back to the bus stop, her soaked shoes squishing with every step. And though she was alone again, something inside her had shifted. She had acted on instinct, on skill, on a part of her heart she thought had died long ago. And not for 1 second did she regret it. Because when a child begs you for a miracle, sometimes you have to become one, even if you don't mean to. Clara May sat alone at the back of the nearly empty SEPTA bus, her body curled into the thick blanket a paramedic had given her. The bus hummed a low, monotonous tune, its fluorescent lights flickering erratically overhead. The driver hadn't said much when she'd climbed aboard, just offered a brief nod and a weary glance at her muddy shoes. She was grateful for the silence. She didn't have the strength for small talk. The bruises on her back throbbed in a steady rhythm that matched the beat of the road beneath the wheels. Each bump and pothole sent a dull, radiating pain through her shoulders. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What lingered, like a ghost in the back of her mind, was the way Eleanor Vance's voice had sliced through the rain, laced with a venom that felt far older and deeper than the moment itself. She looked at me like I was garbage. Clara May whispered to no one, like I was the danger, even when I was the one saving him. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The city passed by outside the window in blurry streaks of wet neon and deep shadow. It was a familiar sight. This part of Philadelphia, her part, wasn't featured in the tourist brochures. It was a landscape of cracked sidewalks, corner stores with heavy metal grates pulled down over their windows, and faded graffiti on old brick walls. It was the kind of place a billionaire like Julian Vance would never visit unless he was hopelessly lost or searching for something he would never admit he needed. Her stop finally came. She stepped off the bus, her shoes squishing against the curb as the sharp wind cut against her face. A group of men stood huddled under the awning of a nearby liquor store, arguing loudly about the Eagles. One of them glanced her way, did a double-take when he saw the hospital-issue blanket draped around her shoulders, and then quickly looked away. She didn't care. The walk to her building was short, but it felt like a mile. She fumbled with her keys and unlocked the front door of the small two-bedroom apartment on the second floor that she shared with her aunt. As she stepped inside, the warm, comforting scent of peppermint tea and fabric softener met her like an old friend. "Clara May?" a voice called from the kitchen. "You're late, honey. Are you okay?" Her Aunt Patty appeared in the doorway, wearing her usual nightgown and a robe tied tightly at the waist, her graying curls tucked neatly into a bonnet. Clara May managed a tired smile. "I'm okay, Aunt Patty. Just had a long night." Patty took one look at her face, at the faint swelling on her cheek and the small scratch on her temple, and her eyes narrowed. "That's not a long night, child. That's a fight." Clara May shook her head. "It's not what it looks like." Patty crossed her arms over her chest. "Then you'd better tell me what it was." So Clara May did. She told her everything. About the little boy who had found her in the rain, about the man in the car, the CPR, the slap, the handcuffs, and the quiet, almost reluctant gratitude from a man she had nearly died saving. Patty listened, silent and still, her expression unreadable. When Clara May finally finished, her aunt let out a long, deep breath. "And they just let you walk home after all that?" "I took the bus." Patty stared at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry. "You should have called me. You should have let me know." "I didn't want you to worry." "Honey," Patty said, her voice thick with emotion, "worrying is what I do. It's how I know I've still got you." Clara May's shoulders finally slumped forward, the weight of the night pressing down on her. "I didn't think I'd ever do that again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Use what I know. Not after what happened at Philly General." "You didn't think you'd save someone's life?" "I didn't think anyone would ever let me." Patty reached out and took her hand, her warm, calloused fingers wrapping around Clara May's. "You didn't wait for anyone's permission, did you?" "No," Clara May whispered. "I just heard that little boy's voice. That's all I needed." They sat like that for a long time, in the quiet of the small apartment. There was no TV, no music, just the gentle creak of old pipes and the low hum of the refrigerator. Then Patty stood up. "You need to get some rest, and put some ice on that shoulder. You're going to be sore in the morning." "I already am." Before heading to her room, Patty paused in the doorway. "You did the right thing, Clara May. Even if the world is too scared or too proud to admit it." Clara May nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the window, watching the last few drops of rain trail down the glass. Her mind drifted back to the boy's face, to his desperation and his unwavering hope. "He believed in me," she thought, and that was enough. The next morning, the city awoke slowly under a blanket of gray skies and wet streets. Clara May sat on the couch, a cold pack pressed against her aching shoulder, scrolling through local news on her phone. She swiped past headlines about city politics and sports until one froze her thumb mid-swipe. Local billionaire saved by unidentified stranger after medical emergency. She tapped the link to open the article. It featured a blurry photo, likely taken from a distance, showing the Mercedes surrounded by the ambulance and police tape. No names had been released yet, but the comments section was already a cesspool of speculation. Bet it was a setup. Probably someone trying to get a lawsuit or a big payout. Looks like another scam to me. Hope that woman didn't hurt him. Clara May swallowed hard. Even without being named, she was already the villain in their story. She turned off the screen. Later that afternoon, as she was sorting laundry, her phone rang from the kitchen counter. The caller ID showed an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello?" "Ms. Thompson," a man's voice said. "This is Dr. Alistair Finch from Pennsylvania Hospital. I was the attending physician last night when Mr. Julian Vance, Sr., was admitted." "Yes, doctor," she said cautiously. "I wanted to reach out to you personally," he said. "Mr. Vance is stable now, and he insisted that we contact you." Clara May's breath caught in her throat. "Is he all right?" "He's recovering well, thanks in no small part to your early intervention. In fact, his exact words were, 'She's the reason I'm still here.'" She sat down slowly on a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly feeling weak. "I know this must have been a traumatic experience for you," the doctor continued, "but I hope you'll consider coming by the hospital. Mr. Vance would like to speak with you whenever you're ready." Clara May looked at the calendar on the wall. The date glared back at her. It was the anniversary of the day she had been fired from Philadelphia General. She closed her eyes. "I'll come," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell him I'll come." The hospital lobby smelled of bleach and a quiet sense of resignation. Clara May paused at the automatic doors, her reflection briefly caught in the glass before she stepped inside. The purplish-blue bruise on her cheek had started to fade, but was still visible under a light layer of makeup. She wore her best shirt, a modest blouse she had ironed 3 times that morning, and her cleanest pair of jeans. It was the most dignity she could afford. At the check-in desk, a nurse with a cheery name badge and tired eyes glanced up. "Can I help you?" "My name is Clara May Thompson," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'm here to see Mr. Julian Vance, Sr." The nurse blinked, clearly recognizing the name, and typed something quickly into her computer. "Room 718. He's expecting you." Then, after a brief pause, she added, "I think he'll be very glad you came." Clara May gave a faint nod and made her way toward the elevators, her shoes clicking softly on the polished tile floor. As the doors closed around her, she let out a long, slow breath. It had been 3 days since that night on the side of the road. 3 days of aching bruises, heavy silence, and a flood of phone calls from news reporters who had somehow managed to find her number. She hadn't answered a single one. But this was different. Room 718 was a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city skyline stretching out toward the horizon. Clara May stood at the threshold for a moment. The door was already slightly ajar. The man in the bed was propped up on several pillows, with IV lines taped to his arm. The color was slowly returning to his cheeks. Julian Vance, Sr., looked smaller than she remembered, less like a titan of industry, and more like a real person. He wasn't wearing a power suit or commanding a boardroom. He was just a man recovering from the brink of death. He turned his head when he heard the soft rustle of her shoes. His eyes met hers, calmer now, clearer. "Clara May Thompson," he said, his voice a bit hoarse but strong. "I was hoping you would come. I wasn't sure if I should." "I'm glad you did." She stepped into the room, unsure of what to do with her hands, whether to offer a handshake, bow her head, or just stand there awkwardly. He seemed to sense her discomfort. "Please, sit down." There was a visitor's chair beside the bed, clean and unoccupied. She took it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Julian was the one to break the silence. "They told me everything. The doctors, my son, the paramedics. I owe you my life." Clara May folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't do it for a thank you." "I know," he said. "And that's what makes it so much harder to say." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw no smugness, no sense of entitlement, just a man who had nearly died and was now trying to make sense of what had happened. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his tone sincere, not suspicious. Clara May hesitated. "Because your son asked me to, and because I knew what to do." His eyes softened. "My mother. She told me what she did, what she thought." Clara May sat up a little straighter, a familiar tension returning to her shoulders. "I'm not pressing charges, if that's what you're worried about." "I'm not," he said quickly. "I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you did, but no, that's not what this is about." He reached for the cup of water on his bedside tray, his hands shaking slightly. Clara May instinctively stood up to help him, but stopped herself. "I've spent most of my life being in control," he said, taking a careful sip. "Running companies, managing investments, buying influence. I always assumed I could fix anything with a phone call." He set the cup down. "But lying there on that sidewalk, gasping for air and seeing you over me, taking hits just to keep me alive. That broke something inside me I didn't even know needed breaking." Clara May didn't know what to say. Her chest felt tight. He continued, "I've asked myself, what would have happened if someone else had found me? Would they have just walked past, or filmed me on their phone, or left me there to die? And the truth is, I don't know. But you didn't." "I couldn't," Clara May said quietly. "That little boy?" He looked at me like I was the only hope he had left. "You were," he said, looking down at the IV in his arm. "You still are." There was a soft knock at the door. They both turned to see Eleanor Vance standing in the threshold, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes avoiding Clara May's for a full 5 seconds before she finally forced herself to look up. "Clara May," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I would like to speak with you, if you'll allow it." Clara May stood up, her fingers tightening on the back of the chair. "I don't need an apology," she said, her voice measured. What I needed was a chance to save someone's life without being treated like a criminal. Eleanor nodded once, her face pale. And you did. You saved my son. I would have saved anyone. I know that now. Clara May studied her. There was no arrogance left in her voice, just something fragile that sounded a lot like regret. Julian watched them quietly, letting the two women navigate the space that couldn't be undone. Eleanor stepped closer and gently set the flowers on the windowsill. I was wrong, she said. I was blinded by fear, by old wounds that had nothing to do with you. And I hurt you when you were doing the most selfless thing anyone has ever done for this family. Clara May didn't speak. Her silence was more eloquent than any response could have been. If there's any way I can make it right, Eleanor began. Clara May finally responded. Start by teaching your grandson what real courage looks like. Because he was the brave one that night, he chose to trust when everyone else chose fear. Eleanor swallowed hard and nodded. Then, quietly, she turned and left the room. The silence that followed felt cleaner somehow, as if something painful but necessary had been cleared out. Julian smiled faintly. You're not like anyone I've ever met. Clara May let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Good. He laughed, a small sound because it still hurt. You'll come back, won't you? Let my son thank you properly. I don't know, she said. Maybe. Can I call you? Clara May smiled for the first time. That depends. Are you going to ask me for investment advice? He chuckled again, this time a softer sound. No, I just want to hear your voice without dying first. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, Julian called after her. Clara May. Yeah? Thank you for saving me, and for not letting them stop you. She nodded. Next time, she said, just try to stay alive without all the drama. Clara May didn't sleep that night. She tried. She lay in her bed, the old ceiling fan circling slowly overhead, the hum of the refrigerator leaking from the kitchen like a slow, dull metronome. But her eyes wouldn't close. And when they did, her mind ran faster than her body could rest. The conversation with Julian Vance, Sr., echoed in her head, his voice calm, fragile, and filled with a gratitude that felt genuine. And Eleanor Vance's apology, stiff and trembling, like a chair with uneven legs. It had felt real, too, but even reality didn't erase bruises, not the ones under her skin, or the ones etched into her history. Clara May stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant to be seen for the first time in a long time. Not as a threat or a mistake or a cautionary tale, but as a healer, a protector. She hadn't worn a nurse's uniform in nearly 3 years, but for 9 minutes on a stormy sidewalk, with nothing but her hands and her instincts, she had been exactly what she used to be, and maybe even more. She finally rose just after 5:01 a.m., pulled on a hoodie, and stepped out into the cool morning air, which had been washed clean by the storm. She walked a few blocks to her favorite coffee spot, a little local joint called Deacon's Brew, where the staff knew her order and never rushed her out. The owner, a bald man in his 60s named Glenn, nodded as she entered. Early today, Clara May. Couldn't sleep. He didn't ask why. He just poured her usual, strong black coffee with a splash of oat milk and a pinch of cinnamon. She sat by the window and watched the world slowly waking up. Mail trucks, joggers, SEPTA buses, and high school kids with backpacks that looked too heavy for their postures. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You saved my father. I hope you'll let me see you again soon. Jules, with some help from Grandma typing. Clara May smiled despite herself. She typed back a simple reply. "You're very brave. Tell your dad I said hello." She pocketed her phone and tried to sip the rest of her coffee, but a voice broke her thoughts. "You're Clara May Thompson, right?" She turned. A man stood near her table. He was in his early 40s, white, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and a press badge on a lanyard around his neck. "I'm Ben Carter. I work with Channel 8 News." She straightened in her chair. "I'm not interested in giving any interviews." "I'm not asking for one," he said. "I just wanted to say that I saw the paramedic report. I know you saved him, and I also know how they treated you afterward." Clara May gave a tight nod. "You're about the 10th reporter to find me. Why are you any different?" "Because I'm not here for a headline," he said. "I'm here for the truth. You didn't ask for any of this attention. And still, you stepped up. I think people need to hear that." She eyed him carefully. "Why? So you can spin it into some feel-good piece and boost your ratings?" "No," he said. "So they remember what justice actually looks like. What it feels like." Clara May didn't speak. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "When you're ready to talk, not before." Then he left. She stared at the card for a long time, unsure whether to tear it up or tuck it away. In the end, she slipped it into her purse. Later that afternoon, as she was folding laundry back at the apartment, Aunt Patty stepped into the hallway with a slightly suspicious expression on her face. "Are you expecting company?" Clara May frowned. "No. Why?" "Then you'd better come to the door." She wiped her hands on her jeans and followed her aunt. A tall man stood in the threshold, with broad shoulders, a pressed shirt, and a familiar quiet intensity in his gaze. It was Julian Vance, Sr., alive and walking. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said, "but I had my assistant find your address. You're supposed to be recovering. You shouldn't be moving around like this. The doctor cleared me, said some fresh air would do me good, and so would some closure." Clara May stepped aside and let him in. Aunt Patty offered him some coffee, but Julian politely declined. He sat on the edge of the couch, as if he didn't quite believe he was welcome there. "I needed to see where you came from," he said, "where you went back to." He looked around the small, humble apartment. "It's humble, but steady. Like you." Clara May crossed her arms. "You're not here just to compliment my furniture." "No," Julian admitted. "I'm here to make an offer." She bristled. "If this is about some kind of reward, I'm not interested." "It's not a reward," he said quickly. "It's a proposal, a real one. I run a foundation in my late wife's name. It supports medical scholarships, especially for women from low-income backgrounds. I want to sponsor you, fully. Back to school, your license, everything." Clara May stared at him. "Why me?" "Because you didn't just save my life. You did it while being dragged, hit, and doubted. And you still didn't stop. That kind of heart, that kind of skill and grace. It's rare. I don't want your pity." "It's not pity," Julian said. "It's respect, and a little bit of selfishness. I want the woman who saved my life to be able to help save others again." Clara May looked away, her jaw tight. "You think you can just walk into my life and fix everything with a scholarship?" "No," he said quietly, "but I can try to repair what people like me help to break." She let his words hang in the air for a long time. Then, softly, she said, "I haven't worn a white coat in years. Maybe it's time you wore one again." Julian stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Think about it. Take your time. You don't owe me anything. But maybe you owe it to yourself." He handed her a thick folder with the foundation's seal on it, filled with paperwork and details. Then he left, without waiting for applause or thanks. Clara May didn't open the folder until after sunset. She sat at the kitchen table, flipped it open, and stared at the words. Full academic re-entry. Tuition, materials, and housing support if needed. Letter from the board. Clara May Thompson is a candidate of exceptional resilience and integrity. She touched the paper as if it might disappear, and for the first time in a very long time, she cried. Clara May stood outside the campus of the University of Pennsylvania's School of Nursing, staring through the ornate iron gates as students buzzed in and out of the stately old buildings. They had backpacks slung over their shoulders, coffee cups in their hands, and lives that were in forward motion. The chill of early spring clung to the air, but the trees were beginning to bloom, with soft whites and pinks stretching toward the Pennsylvania sky, as if they had forgotten that winter ever happened. She tightened her grip on the admissions envelope. Her name was printed cleanly on the top. Clara May Nicole Thompson. Below it, in elegant lettering, were the words, Full Scholarship. Awarded by the Lillian Vance Foundation for Medical Excellence. 3 weeks had passed since Julian Vance, Sr., had handed her that folder. She hadn't said yes immediately. She wasn't ready. The physical pain from that night had started to fade, but the weight of what it all meant hadn't. Accepting the scholarship felt like crossing a bridge she hadn't built herself. And yet, here she was. She stepped through the gates, her steps measured, her heart heavier than she let on. The campus was beautiful, yes, but it also reminded her of everything she had lost, of the person she had been before that night at Philadelphia General when her license had been suspended, and her reputation buried under a mountain of bureaucracy and cowardice. But Julian's words rang in her ears. Maybe it's time you wore the coat again. She entered the admissions building and followed the signs to the orientation office. Inside, a secretary greeted her politely, handed her a schedule, a student ID, and a packet of information she already knew by heart. Then came the moment. The woman reached beneath her desk and pulled out a folded, pressed, brand-new white coat. A name tag was already stitched onto it. C. Thompson, student, RN. "Welcome back, Ms. Thompson," the secretary said, with a kind smile. "It looks good on you." Clara May took it with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. It wasn't just fabric. It was years of doubt, anger, grief, and hope. It was the weight of return. She didn't try it on just yet. Instead, she walked out of the building and found a quiet bench near a fountain. She sat there for a long while, the coat in her lap, watching the students laugh, share notes, and complain about their professors. Normal things, things she had missed. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Patty. "Proud of you. Don't you dare back out now." Then another one, from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, it's Jules. Dad says you're a nurse again. I told him you never stopped being one." Clara May smiled. Her thumb hovered over the reply button when another text came in. "P.S. Will you come over for dinner sometime? Dad's cooking. He says it's safe now." She chuckled, but before she could reply, a voice cut through her thoughts. "Well, if it isn't Philadelphia's miracle worker." She turned. It was Ben Carter, the reporter from Channel 8. He stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, a camera bag slung across his shoulder. She tensed up. "I didn't agree to an interview." "I'm not here for that," he said quickly. "Promise. I was meeting a contact in the next building and saw you through the window." She raised an eyebrow. "So you decided to come say hi?" "I did. And to give you this." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. It was a printed copy of an article. The title read, When Courage Isn't Convenient. The Clara May Thompson story. I didn't run it, he said. My editor approved it, but I pulled it. Clara May blinked. Why? Because I realized it wasn't my story to tell yet. Not without you. She looked at him, surprised. Most reporters wouldn't care. I do, he said. I saw something that night. Something bigger than headlines. I saw a woman do what no one else would. And then I saw people try to twist it. That story deserves better than a news cycle. He placed the article beside her on the bench. If you ever want to tell it, on your terms, I'll be here. No rush. No pressure. Clara May nodded slowly. Thank you. Ben turned to go, then paused. Are you really going back into medicine? I am, she said, lifting the coat from her lap. One class at a time. Good, he said. Philadelphia needs you, even if it doesn't know it yet. When he had gone, Clara May finally stood up, unfolded the white coat, and slid it over her shoulders. It didn't feel like redemption. It felt like reclaiming. That evening, back at the apartment, Aunt Patty made cornbread and greens. Because comfort food is holy, she said. Clara May sat at the kitchen table, her coat still on, flipping through textbooks that were already dog-eared and highlighted. You look like you never left, Aunt Patty smiled, watching her from across the room. I feel like I'm just getting started. A knock came at the door. Aunt Patty raised an eyebrow. Are you expecting someone? Clara May shook her head and opened the door. Standing there, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers and wearing a nervous grin, was Jules. He wore a tie that was much too big for him. Behind him stood Julian Sr., holding a casserole dish awkwardly in both hands. We brought dinner, Julian Sr. said. I cooked. He stirred, the boy corrected proudly. Clara May stood there, stunned. Aunt Patty peeked over her shoulder. Well, don't just let the food get cold. Come on in. As the boy rushed in, trailing the scent of baked cheese and something vaguely Italian, Clara May looked at Julian Sr. I didn't say yes to dinner yet. I know, he said. I was hoping you'd say yes with your appetite. She stared at him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. Fine, she said. But if it's awful, I'm walking out with the pan. He laughed. Inside, the lights were warm, the food was real, and, for the first time in years, Clara May felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. Home. The casserole was surprisingly decent. It wasn't great. Jules had gone a little heavy on the oregano, and the top layer of cheese was slightly singed in one corner. But it was warm, filling, and, more importantly, it had been made with the kind of care that didn't come from recipes. Clara May sat at the dinner table, still wearing her white coat, the scent of baked pasta mingling with the subtle lavender of Aunt Patty's plug-in air freshener. Jules had already finished his first plate and was working on his second, talking animatedly about how he wanted to be a scientist and also a fireman, and also maybe a heart doctor, like the one who had helped his daddy. Julian Sr. chuckled quietly at his son's ambitions. He's a multitasker, he said. Clara May gave him a sidelong look. I didn't think billionaires made casseroles. I don't, he replied, mock whispering. But I watched a woman on YouTube do it twice. Aunt Patty, seated across from them, let out a soft laugh. You're not half bad for a man with 5 assistants. Only 4 now, Julian said. One of them quit after I asked her to organize my spice rack. The conversation was light, flowing easily in the small apartment. But under the laughter, under the clinking of forks and the stories from a 5-year-old boy with more energy than sense, Clara May felt a tension building. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that signaled something was coming, something she would have to face. She felt it most when Julian Sr. grew quiet. "Are you all right?" she asked him. He nodded slowly. "I've just been thinking about everything." "That covers a lot of ground." He set his fork down and looked directly at her. "I thought I understood how the world worked, who I could trust, what danger looked like." Clara May stayed silent, letting him get there on his own. "But that night, the way you fought to save me, even while being hit and pulled and doubted." He swallowed. "You didn't stop." She leaned back in her chair. "I didn't have time to second-guess myself. If I had hesitated, you'd be dead. Most people would have walked away." "Maybe," she said, "but your son didn't let me." Jules piped up with a mouthful of cornbread. "She's a real hero, Daddy. Like the ones in the movies." Clara May smiled at him. "Heroes usually don't have bruised ribs and overdue rent, kiddo." "You can have both," he replied confidently. The moment lingered. Then came a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Aunt Patty stood up, looking wary. "Are you expecting someone else?" Clara May shook her head. Julian Sr. tensed subtly. She moved to the door cautiously and opened it. Standing there was a woman in a beige coat, in her mid-40s, with sharp red lipstick and eyes that had seen a lot. She flashed a press badge. "Ms. Thompson, I'm Camille Rost, from the Philadelphia Register. I was hoping for a moment of your time." Clara May didn't hide her irritation. "How did you find me?" Camille didn't flinch. The same way every good story finds its source: persistence, and a little help from someone who thinks your voice matters. "Ben Carter." Camille offered the slightest of nods. Julian Sr. appeared behind Clara May, his posture changing the second he saw Camille. "Ms. Rost," he said, his voice cool, "I believe you've already received our statement through our legal team." "I have," she replied, "but I'm not here for you, Mr. Vance. I'm here for her." She turned back to Clara May. "May I come in?" Clara May stared at her for a moment, then stepped aside. Camille entered, took one look at Aunt Patty's living room, small, neat, decorated with framed Bible verses and a wall clock shaped like a rooster, and sat carefully on the edge of the floral couch. "I'm not here to dig up dirt," Camille began, "but people need to hear the truth from you." Clara May crossed her arms. "And what truth is that? That I performed CPR while being yanked and slapped? That I was treated like a criminal until your storybook billionaire vouched for me?" Camille stayed calm. The public doesn't know the details. They know whispers, internet threads, speculation. You were cast as a threat before they even knew your name. Clara May's jaw tightened. "I'm giving you the chance to tell it your way," Camille continued. "Unfiltered. Your voice, your words, not mine." Julian Sr. stepped in, his tone firm. "If this is about spinning the story for clicks—" "It's not," Camille interrupted. "Frankly, it doesn't need spinning. The facts are enough." Clara May looked from Camille to Julian, then to Aunt Patty, who stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hand and concern in her eyes. Finally, Clara May spoke. "What would I even say?" Camille smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you give for charm, but one that said, "Thank you for not shutting the door." You'd say what happened, that you were afraid, that you acted anyway, that you didn't expect gratitude, but you didn't deserve suspicion, that sometimes, when a child begs you to save his father, you don't stop to ask who he is. You just do it. The silence that followed was thick. Jules, unbothered by the adult tension, leaned toward Clara May and whispered, "You should tell them. You're braver than anyone." She looked at Camille. "One interview. My terms. One version. The truth." Camille nodded. That's all I ever ask for." As the reporter left, Clara May sat back down at the table, her appetite gone, but her resolve sharpened. Julian Sr. looked at her. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Clara May said, "but I'm tired of letting other people write my story for me." She stood up, glanced at the white coat still hanging on the back of her chair, and added softly, "It's time they heard the whole truth, even if it hurts." The lights in the small recording studio were soft but focused. There were no flashing bulbs, no makeup artists, just a single camera, a table, two microphones, and Clara May's folded hands resting calmly in front of her. Camille Rost sat across from her, dressed in a muted navy suit, her notepad open but barely used. She had already done the background work. What she wanted now was the truth, not trivia. The video was being filmed for a segment titled "One Night, One Choice." It would air in a week, but Clara May had been given final approval before it saw the light of day. Still, the red recording light on the camera glared at her like a judgment. "Are you ready?" Camille asked gently. Clara May didn't nod. She simply looked up and began to speak. "I was waiting for a bus when he found me. Just a little boy, soaking wet, barely old enough to tie his own shoes. He looked at me with these wide, terrified eyes and said, 'Ma'am, please save my dad.' That was it. No explanation, no warning, just a plea." She paused, the words hanging in the air like the moment itself. "I followed him to the car. His father was slumped over the wheel, cold and not breathing right. I checked his pulse and started CPR. I didn't have a medical bag, or gloves, or a team. I just had my hands and my memory." Camille didn't interrupt. Clara May continued, her voice steady but soft. "I used to be a nurse, trained and certified. I lost my license after I spoke up against someone with more power than me. They called it insubordination. I called it integrity." Her fingers curled slightly on the table. "That night, none of that mattered. I saw a man dying, and I chose to fight for him. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't know he was a billionaire. I didn't know his last name or his politics. All I knew was that his child was watching." She swallowed, her jaw tightening. "And then his mother arrived." She paused again, not for dramatic effect, but to keep her own emotions from spilling over. She saw a woman in a worn-out coat leaning over her son, and she assumed the worst. She screamed. She hit me. She pulled me away from him. I tried to explain, but she didn't listen. The camera didn't flinch, and neither did Camille. I went back anyway, because the man was dying, and I was the only one there who knew how to stop it. So I did, even while being accused, even while being struck, even when the police arrived and put me in handcuffs without asking a single question." Her voice caught slightly, but didn't break. "I didn't do it for applause or for forgiveness. I did it because life is sacred, and because that child looked at me like I mattered." She leaned forward now, her tone shifting slightly. "We talk about justice in this country like it's something to be found in courtrooms and laws, but sometimes justice is just a woman doing the right thing in the dark, even when no one believes her. Especially then." Camille sat back. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was earned. "Thank you, Clara May," she said. "That's all I needed." Clara May nodded. Later that evening, the raw footage was sent to her phone. She watched it alone at her kitchen table, with earbuds in and the lights low. When the part came where she described being struck, she instinctively rubbed her shoulder. The bruises were mostly gone now, but their memory was sharp. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she clicked "Approve" and sent it back. The segment aired the following Sunday night. It opened with a still shot of the Mercedes under the rain, with emergency lights flashing in the background. Camille's voice narrated, but the heartbeat of the piece was Clara May's own words. Within minutes of airing, it went viral. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was political, but because it was honest. On Monday morning, Clara May's inbox was full. There were messages from nurses who had been pushed out of hospitals, from women who had survived discrimination in silence, from strangers thanking her for her courage. A doctor from Boston offered her a mentorship program. A civil rights attorney offered to reopen her license case, pro bono. Even more surprising, a letter arrived, handwritten in elegant script. Dear Ms. Thompson, I watched your interview. For the first time, I didn't see a threat. I saw grace. I am ashamed of how I treated you. I am working on that. Thank you for showing my grandson what true strength looks like. Eleanor Vance. Clara May read it 3 times, then folded it and tucked it into her journal. At the hospital, Julian Sr. met her in the front lobby with 2 cups of coffee. I saw it, he said. She nodded, taking one of the cups. Are you okay with what I said? I was relieved. They walked through the lobby slowly. You weren't just telling your truth, he said. You were telling mine, too. And that scares me, in a good way. She smiled. You'll get used to it. He looked at her, his expression serious. You changed everything, Clara May. You didn't just save my life. You made me look at it differently. That's not my job, she replied. No, he said. But maybe it's your gift. As they passed the reception desk, a young black nurse caught Clara May's eye. Ms. Thompson? The nurse said. Clara May turned. I just wanted to say thank you for giving all of us permission to not keep quiet anymore. Clara May's throat tightened. She gave a small, respectful nod. Thank you for saying that. When they stepped outside, the sun was setting in a blaze of gold behind the skyline. Jules ran ahead, chasing a pigeon, laughing. You're not going to disappear again, are you? Julian Sr. asked. No, Clara May said. I've spent enough time being invisible. And as the city exhaled behind them, the woman who was once accused, once silenced, once bruised, walked forward with her shoulders square, and her voice, finally, her own. Julian Vance, Sr. stared out the 12th floor window of Vance Financial Group, his gaze fixed on the skyline he once thought he owned. The morning sun gleamed off the high-rise glass, but his mind wasn't on quarterly reports or IPOs. His thoughts were still back at Clara May's kitchen table and on the broadcast that had shaken the city just days earlier. The boardroom behind him buzzed quietly. Half a dozen directors shuffled papers, cleared their throats, and exchanged wary glances. Julian had called this emergency meeting with no agenda. That alone had unsettled them. Billionaires didn't do surprises. Not in business. When he finally turned to face them, his voice was calm but clipped. We need to talk about legacy. That got their attention. Legacy? Barked Raymond Klein, the head of strategy, a man in his early 60s with a watch worth more than some small cars. Sir, with all due respect, we have to address the stockholder fallout from the Channel 8 segment first. I am addressing it, Julian replied evenly. Clara May Thompson is our legacy now. Or rather, how we respond to her is. Murmurs rippled across the table. Are you suggesting we issue a public statement? Asked one of the directors. No, Julian said. I'm suggesting we act. No press stunt. No damage control. Actual reform. The CFO, a younger man named Garrett, frowned. What does that mean in practical terms? Julian stepped forward. It means we evaluate every division where unconscious bias may have influenced hiring, discipline, or promotion. It means funding scholarships not just through our foundation, but embedded into company policy. And it means re-examining our own board diversity, starting today. Raymond leaned forward. This is about guilt, isn't it? No, Julian said. It's about truth and courage, something a woman without a dollar to her name showed more of than most of us combined. Someone whispered, "He's serious." Julian looked around the room, no longer the tired man in a hospital bed, but the one who had built an empire brick by brick. His voice dropped lower. You think this is charity? It's not. It's a correction. It's justice that's long overdue. And it's profitable. You want the public to trust us? Show them why they should. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Then, slowly, one hand clapped. It was Eloise Patterson, the company's chief legal counsel. She was one of the few women and the only black woman on the executive team. That's the first time in years I've heard this board talk about doing something instead of covering something up. Julian nodded to her. Would you lead the internal audit? With pleasure, she said. And for the record, it's about damn time. Meanwhile, across town, Clara May stood outside an old boarded-up clinic on Peachtree Road. It had once been a vibrant community health center, but the funding had dried up years ago, and it had been shut down, like so many others that served low-income families. Today, though, a new sign was going up. The Clara May Thompson Community Care Center. Opening soon. She couldn't believe it. Not because she didn't dream of something like it, but because it had actually happened. The funding, a combination of backing from the Vance Foundation and a wave of donations that had poured in after the interview aired, some large, most small, many anonymous, had made it possible. Notes had accompanied some of the donations. My daughter is alive because a nurse like you didn't give up. You reminded me why I joined medicine in the first place. Thank you for protecting our sons when no one else did. Inside, walls were being painted and exam tables were being delivered. Clara May walked through the space, a clipboard in her hand, greeting volunteers and answering questions. Her white coat now had the center's name embroidered over her heart. Aunt Patty followed close behind, carrying a tray of lemonade. Feels real now, doesn't it? She asked. It does, Clara May said, and a little terrifying. You've fought worse, Clara May smiled. That's the problem. I'm starting to get used to fighting. Aunt Patty handed her a cup of lemonade. Well, fight smart this time. This place isn't just a clinic, it's a symbol, and they'll come for it. I know, Clara May said quietly, but they'll have to go through me. That night, at the Vance estate, Julian Sr. sat in his study, sipping a glass of tea instead of his usual bourbon. His son was asleep upstairs, and his mother was silent somewhere down the hall, still processing everything. The door creaked open. Eleanor Vance stood there, her posture stiff. I watched the dedication, she said. Julian waited. She named it after herself. She earned that right. Eleanor looked at him, the steel in her spine slowly softening. She reminds me of your wife. Julian blinked. How so? Lillian never waited for permission either. There was a long silence between them. She'll be attacked, Eleanor said. You know that, by those who don't want change. I'll protect her, Julian replied. Eleanor stepped closer. No, you'll stand beside her. Not above her, not in front of her. Beside her. Then she turned and left the room. Julian sat there for a long time, staring at the dying fire. The world was shifting, and this time he wasn't resisting. He was finally helping it turn. It started with a broken window. Clara May got the call just after 3 a.m. Her phone vibrated angrily on the nightstand, dragging her out of the first deep sleep she'd had in weeks. She answered on instinct, her voice groggy. "This is Clara May." "Ms. Thompson, it's Sergeant Holden with the Philadelphia PD. You might want to come down to the clinic." Her heart dropped. "What happened?" "There's been a break-in. Looks like vandalism. No injuries, but you'll want to see it for yourself." She was already out of bed, pulling on jeans and a hoodie. Aunt Patty sat up groggily from the couch, where she had fallen asleep watching late-night game shows. "What is it?" "Someone broke into the clinic," Clara May said, her voice grim. 10 minutes later, the headlights of Clara May's car cut through the parking lot as she pulled up to a scene of flashing red and blue lights. Officers milled around with notepads and gloves, and yellow tape was stretched across the glass doors of the Clara May Thompson Community Care Center. Her chest tightened as she stepped out of the car. The front window had been shattered inward, with glass shards scattered across the sidewalk. Vicious black letters had been spray-painted across the brick facade. "Stay in your place. Not a hero. White lives matter, too." Clara May stood there, her expression blank, but her breath hitched. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't cry, but something inside her cracked. Sergeant Holden approached her. He was an older black officer, seasoned and respectful. "We think it happened about 40 minutes ago. The security cameras weren't working yet. The electrician was scheduled for Thursday. We'll canvass the area, get statements, but they knew what they were doing," Clara May finished for him. He gave a grim nod. Aunt Patty arrived a few minutes later, still tying her scarf, her eyes wide as she took in the damage. Clara May's voice was still. "Did they get inside?" "No," the officer said. "We think they were just trying to make a statement." "Well," Clara May muttered, "so am I." By 9 a.m., the story had already made the news. A drone clip of the vandalism ran on 3 local stations. Talk shows lit up with hot takes. Some hailed Clara May as a symbol of unity attacked by hate, while others questioned whether all the attention had made her a target, or even implied that she had brought it on herself. Ben Carter called. "I can help you frame a statement, if you want." "I don't need to reframe what they did," Clara May said, "but you can film what I'm going to do next." Within hours, a press conference was organized in front of the still-damaged building. Clara May stood behind a podium, flanked by 2 clinic staffers and Aunt Patty at her side. There was no teleprompter, no prepared speech. She spoke from somewhere deeper. "I stood here just a few days ago and told the world I was ready to serve again, ready to heal again. And last night, someone, or some people, decided to remind me that healing isn't welcome by all." She gestured to the vandalism, which was now half covered by a tarp. "They tried to silence a place built for care, for broken bodies, for exhausted mothers, for scared children, for the uninsured, for the forgotten. They thought that if they used fear, I'd walk away." She stepped forward, her voice rising. "Well, here I am. Not walking,